Hey, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja. We got a great Ask a Ninja from someone who is having an issue with standing water in their crawl space in spite of it sounding like they've got a full encapsulation. So what are some ways that you can check to see why you still have standing water in your crawl space? Stay tuned. So one of our YouTube viewers gave us an interesting question. They said, I have a dehumidifier, a sump pump, and plastic laid out, still have standing water in the crawl space. If you're new to Crawl Space Ninja, we talk about everything related to crawl space encapsulation, waterproofing, humidity. We hope you'll subscribe to our channel, ring the notifications bell, and of course follow us on Facebook too. So I came up with a list of 6 things that I believe they should check to see why they may still have standing water. So the first thing the homeowner should check is the trench and the pipe that they put inside the crawl space. Now, if you don't have flooding in your crawl space, you may not be familiar with what the pipe does. Residential building code actually says that if you have evidence of standing water inside your crawl space, you are to install a French drain on the interior of your crawl space. And that may sound like a simple task, but believe it or not, we see a lot of crawl space encapsulation companies that do not install them properly. They either use a black corrugated pipe without a sock around it, which means that it'll fill up with mud eventually and clog, which could cause flooding, or they don't bury it. Yes, they don't bury it in the ground. They will around the door where they expect the homeowner to look in and say, oh yeah, that looks great, Mr. Contractor. But then they don't bury it around the rest of the crawl space. So the whole reason for having that pipe installed is to take the water that's coming into the foundation and direct it to the sump pump or to the exit point out of the crawl space. Another thing that you need to look at as far as the pipe goes is it should have an aggregate around it. We use the NDS Easy Flow, which has the sock and the aggregate built onto it, but if you don't have access to that, you can use a silt filter that goes around the pipe and then put gravel on top of that pipe to give it enough space so that that water can make its way into that corrugated plastic pipe and make its way out. So that would be the first thing I would check, is to make sure your pipe is installed properly, make sure it has a silt filter and an aggregate, make sure the water is flowing downhill towards the exit point of the crawl space and it's actually buried inside the ground properly. The second thing to check if you have standing water in your crawl space and you have an encapsulation would be obviously the sump pump. Make sure the sump pump is actually working properly. A lot of these sump pumps has a float, and if it's in a sump pump basin, you can take the lid off and you can reach your arm down in the basin and then you can lift the float, make sure that you hear it running, or you can fill it up with water, make sure the float's working properly, make sure the sump pump's working properly. And I've got a couple of sump pump videos that we've done, and I'll put a link to one of them. We got one that talks about the 8 things all sump pump owners should know. It's funny, one of our comments that we got on our channel was, if you have a sump pump, a plumber told me the best thing to do is to have a backup sump pump. So that's good advice. If you have a sump pump system, make sure you have bought an extra sump pump just in case, because when is that sump pump going to fail? It's going to fail when you need it the most. By the way, we sell those on our DIY store as well, the 4,800 gallon per hour cast iron sump pumps. But make sure the basin actually has a felt around it to keep soil and different things from going into the basin, and make sure you use a basin. We have seen many contractors install sump pumps directly on the mud or not down in a hole so that the water can make its way to it. And then of course, the way we install the sump pump in the basin is we tie that French drain directly into the basin, so that way the water has easier access to get to that sump pump. So that would be the second thing I would check, is the sump pump. Okay, so the third thing I would look at, believe it or not, is actually the crawl space vapor barrier or plastic or vapor retarder or whatever it is you want to call it. Believe it or not, a loose laid vapor barrier is not good for a crawl space that takes on water or has a lot of humidity. It's just designed as a ground cover. As soon as the water starts to flood into the crawl space, that loose laid vapor barrier will start to shift and move. And part of the plastic's job is to actually keep the water under the plastic so that the water can make its way into that French drain that we talked about and eventually into that sump pump that we talked about. So if you've got a vapor barrier installed that's not overlapped and taped and not mechanically attached to the wall, that can shift and move and it becomes ineffective, and then you get water on top of the plastic, then you have to get the dehumidifier to take care of that water because the water can't drain back down into the ground or into the French drain. So check your vapor barrier. Don't hire people that install a loose lay vapor barrier. Just throw it down. It needs to be overlapped and taped, mechanically fastened, and especially around the door. That's a good entry point for flooding, is around your doors and your vents. Speaking of the door, that would be the fourth thing I would check. Make sure that the door is not level with the ground outside, okay? So you want to build up your framing of the door. The door jamb needs to be up high, just like the door going into your home. There's a door jamb that you have to step over to get into the house. That's designed to keep water from going into your home. Your crawl space door needs that as well. And we did a crawl space inspection video, and I'll put a link down below to that. The very first thing I pointed out was the door was installed improperly. So make sure you have a properly installed air sealed door to keep water out of the crawl space. Another tip I would do, and this would be number 5, is if you have a large crawl space, make sure that you put a sump pump and a sump pump basin at least every 140 linear feet. Now, if you live in Wilmington, North Carolina, where they're on the coastal flood lines, you may have to put more sump pumps in there. If you live, somewhere else, you may not need as many, but you need to have at least one every 140 linear feet. I mean, think about if you've got a 2,000 to 2,500 square foot crawl space and you've got one sump pump that's 300 linear feet away, that's a long way for that water to have to travel in that French drain to make its way to that sump pump and then to be discharged properly outside of the crawl space. Another tip as far as that goes is you may put 2 sump pumps in one basin. I would put 1 sump pump every 140 linear feet, but if you're in a huge flood area, you may go ahead and put 2 sump pumps in, so that way you get double the amount of water being pushed out of the crawl space. And tip number 6 is I would always check your yard drainage. Make sure you have either a curtain drain or a French drain, especially if you're on a hill and you've got a lot of water coming at your house, either from a hill or from a neighbor or something like that. Install a French drain on the outside of the house. We've done several videos about proper French drain installation that I'll put some links down below. But you don't want to bury it too deep, because the design of the French drain is to take on surface water and then redirect that water around your house. That's why some people call it a curtain drain. The other thing to check is make sure all your downspouts are extended at least 15 feet. If you've got a basement, you may want to go out even further, maybe 25, 30 feet away from the foundation, and make sure that water is exiting to daylight. In other words, don't bury it into the dirt. Put it into a pop-up emitter or something like that, and then have that water flow downhill. So you want to get the water away from the foundation and then have that exiting water that's coming out of those downspouts make its way away from your house, probably to your neighbor's house. So I'm Michael Church of Crawl Space Ninja. Again, make sure you let us know down below any tips you may have on how to address flooding if you've already encapsulated your crawl space. Hope you make it a happy and blessed day. We'll see you later.